One of the most beloved features of Christmas is the music. This week, again, I want to look at a couple of these Christmas hymns and the stories behind them. I've tried to research some of these things online, but again, found most helpful a book by Andrew or Ace Collins entitled Stories Behind the Best Love Songs of Christmas, which I'm using today. Number one, Good King Wenceslas. Of all the ancient legends that surround Christmas, the tale about King Wenceslas stands out. Though the carol was composed by a noted songwriter and priest, John Mason Neale, who we actually looked at last week when we talked about Good Christian Men Rejoice, this song is based less on the writer's inspiration than on historical fact. King Wenceslas was a real member of European royalty, a ruler who daily touched his subjects with Christian kindness and charity. For many in the Dark Ages, this king, or actually, as we'll find out, he was a duke, not really a king. This guy, along with Saint Nicholas of Greece, became really the role model for Santa Claus. And today, over 1,000 years after his death, King Wenceslas remains a role model for Christian people everywhere. The son of Duke Borovoy of Bohemia, Wenceslas had the good fortune to be raised by his grandmother, Ludmilla. And Ludmilla was a devoted Christian woman who taught her grandson the meaning of faith, hope, and charity. Wenceslas took his grandmother's lessons to heart, and in 922 BC, when Duke Borovoy was killed in battle, the youngster seemed ready to put what he had learned into action. At the tender age of 15, Wenceslas, just a few minutes older than his twin brother, Boleslas, was made the leader of Bohemia. As the young duke attempted to guide the troubled nation, his mother, Drahomira, and his brother, Basilas, instituted a pagan revolt. They assassinated Ludmilla as she prayed and then attempted to overthrow Wenceslas. The teen took charge and put down the rebellion, and in an act of Christian kindness expelled his mother and brother rather than executing them. The tiny nation was amazed that this boy would react with such great mercy. With the wisdom of Solomon, the young duke set up a nation built on true justice and mercy. He enacted laws in the manner he thought would best serve his Lord. He even journeyed out into the country, seeking insight as to what his people needed. When possible, he shared everything from firewood to meat with his subjects. He took pity on the poor and urged those blessed with wealth to reach out to the less fortunate. In large part due to Wenceslas's example, a host of pagan peasants turned to Christianity. It was a revival unlike any that had ever been seen in the country. When Wenceslas married and had a son, all of Bohemia celebrated. Peasants and powerful landlords sought the man out, offering their prayers for a long life of happiness. With a smile on his face, the leader assured them that he was praying for their happiness as well. In the years that followed, the Duke and his subjects continued to share both their prayers and their blessings with each other daily. Rarely had a leader been as universally revered as Wenceslas. And Wenceslas loved Christmas. Centuries before gift-giving became a part of the holiday tradition, this young leader embraced the joy of sharing his bounty with others. Inspired by a sincere spirit of compassion, each Christmas Eve, the Duke sought out the most needy of his subjects and visited them. With his pages at his side, Wenceslas brought food and firewood and clothing. After greeting all in the household, the Duke would continue to his next stop. Often, though faced with harsh weather conditions, Wenceslas never postponed his rounds. Like a 20th century St. Nick, the kindly young man made the night before Christmas special for scores of families. And for many, a Christmas Eve visit from the Duke was an answer to prayer, and it was a special reason to celebrate the birth of Jesus. In 929, when he was just 22 years old, Wenceslas was on his way to church for his daily prayers. And as he greeted his subjects and took time to ask about their health, the warm look on the man's face assured each of them that he cared deeply about their welfare. And smiling and shouting greetings, he continued on to the chapel. Just before entering, he heard a familiar voice. And turning, he must have been very surprised when his twin brother greeted him. As a confused look crossed the Duke's face, Boleslas's confederates ran up to Wenceslas and stabbed him. Falling to his knees on the church steps, the dying ruler looked up and whispered, "Brother, may God forgive you." And then he died. It was a group of powerful pagan leaders that had supported Boleslas's overthrow of Wenceslas. Amazingly, when the young man Boleslas realized what he had done, the new Duke actually turned away from his colleagues in the pagan group, and he embraced Christianity, the faith that had guided his brother's life and rule. And though he had planned the revolt that killed his twin, it was Boleslas who sustained the legend of Wenceslas. Thanks to the man who killed his brother and whose brother asked God to forgive him, the crown of Wenceslas became the symbol of the Czech nation. John Mason Neale closely identified with Wenceslas in that he too reached out to saint and sinner alike. And though often rebuked by Christians, Neale constantly tried to help and reform prostitutes and thieves and even murderers. Any man or woman who ventured into his path felt the Englishman's loving touch. And so he put this song together about Wenceslas, and it goes like this. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even, brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, his servant, and stand by me. If thou knowest it, telling yonder peasant who is he, where and what is his dwelling. Sire, he lives a good league hence, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes' fountain. Bring me flesh and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither. Thou and I will see him dine, when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament and the bitter weather. Sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how I can go on no longer. Mark my footsteps, good my page, tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. And in his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christian men, be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. When not involved in his mission outreach, Neale spent a great deal of time reviewing the ancient Latin songs and texts, often translating them into English for use in the church services. One of the stories he came across was the biography of Wenceslas. Sensing that this Duke would make a wonderful role model for children, Neale rewrote the old tale in verse form, making the Duke a king, and matching his lyrics to a Latin melody, Tempus adest Floridium. It now seems ironic that Neil's Christmas carol would be sung to a tune that, when translated, means spring has unwrapped her flowers. Yet because Wenceslas brought his poorest subjects a breath of fresh air and warmth to the darkest of winter days, perhaps Neil's choice was no accident. When published, Good King Wenceslas quickly became a holiday favorite in Europe. By the last part of the 19th century, it was sung throughout the United States as well. This carol was largely responsible for making the legend of Wenceslas known throughout the world, as it touched upon the Bohemian saint's example of faith, hope, and charity. Suddenly, the symbol of Czech independence became the crown jewel of Christian living. One of the most telling facets of the Duke's legendary life can be found in the final verse of Good King Wenceslas. In the carol, the king reminds his page that when a person is alone, life is dark and bleak. But when a person reaches out to others, like Christ reached out to those in need, then that person never walks alone. Christ and those who have been touched by kindness are there to make each step of the journey easier and brighter. Just as the page's walk was made easier by following in the king's footsteps, so the king's way was made easier by following in the steps of Christ. Wenceslas and Neil both held positions of importance. Either could have chosen to be served by others, and yet each instead devoted their lives to service. Both understood the tenets of faith, hope, and charity, and throughout their lives reached out to others with compassion and love, especially those who were down and out. Now, the carol, Good King Wenceslas, reminds the world that the spirit of Christmas, that giving spirit, didn't begin with Santa Claus, nor should it end there. That spirit can be alive in all who choose to give with love and live by faith.